General Ham, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for your leadership here at AUSA and for all the support we get doing the things we do for our nation and being able to bring together a great diverse group of folks like this and General Brown, Bob, all that you've done here and in the Pacific, not on just behalf of the Army, but really, again, our nation and the coalition folks that are here pushing us to an even better future. And General Ham, I do have to also congratulate you on your robust membership drive that you're having here at AUSA. And as you said, the way that you've been able to leverage your good trade-off training of understanding terrain, decisive points, canalizing effect and obstacles by putting the membership tables right in front of the latrines, as you said. And so yesterday, after 3 cups of coffee, I was managed to be talked into signing up for my 6th lifetime membership for AUSA, just so I could use the facility. So I'll try to get it back in donuts and coffee or something here. Well, you know, we've had a lot, and also last year I was here, and I'm always being sort of put in a difficult position because last year I followed Admiral Harris after his speech, and then today I'm following Admiral Harris. The good thing is last year when the paradigm was I followed Admiral Harris after his speech, Army beat Navy. So hopefully, again, the paradigm continues as well, other than being in a tough spot. So we've had a lot of discussion in the last couple of days. I've had a number of bilateral discussions and talks with other folks in the joint arena, our business leaders that are here, et cetera, about multi-domain battle, and everybody's multi-domaining now, and that's all good. And I've had a number of discussions at other venues, a lot of them AUSA venues. We kind of rolled this out last year in October. And so I thought what I'd do is I'm not going to sort of relive the all multi-domain 101 kind of thing. What I do want to do is since I've had the opportunity to go around the world literally and talk about this, after a while you do tend to get some of these same type questions in same type issues that people are sort of bringing up and trying to get clarity. So I thought I'd use this as a chance to do a little bit of a review, but probably more importantly, hit on some of those that I think the key points that may sometimes escape some of the normal discussions on this, as well as preemptively answer some questions, and then at the end we'll open up to the Q&A. So, and if you'll go to the first slide. Now, luckily, I do not have the typical Tradoshan pack of 100 slides, et cetera, like that. I only have, I think, 3, and most of them are pictures anyways. So this is one that we use a lot, multi-domain battle, and it tries to give sort of a pictorial visualization of some of the things that we want to talk about. But in the end, I sort of get, so what? Why are you even doing multi-domain battle? Is it just because you got to have a new bumper sticker so people will read your new manuals? You've got to have something to talk about at AUSA or whatever. And I'm not going to discount any of those previous motivators. But really, as we take a look at what's going on in the world today and what we look at with regards to the future that could be problems, I guess, I think if I walk away from here, if we're still hooked up. One of the problems that we're seeing around the world, and actually particularly in this part of the world, that we see our enemy and potential enemies trying to do to us, and the one thing that has always been our strength is we think that our ability to maneuver, and we define maneuver, at least in the Army, as the application of all elements of combat power, which are all the warfighting functions, along with information and leadership. We consider ourselves, our ability to maneuver leadership on the battlefield to be very critical. That our enemies see that actually is a very difficult thing to mitigate. If your enemy can maneuver, if they can take all the elements of combat power and maneuver them, not just move them, but maneuver them to positions of advantage and synchronize them, it becomes very difficult to mitigate that. And it has always been our strength, and it is something that we spend a lot of time on in our Army as well as with our coalitions is how do I maneuver my capability around the area that I'm operating in and synchronize all those elements so that again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so our enemies have seen that, and they are going to great lengths to fix us. They are going at great lengths to prevent us from being able to maneuver, and they are going to great lengths trying to take options away from us. Because if they can take away our options, and we have very few options left, and if those options are options which have significant unintended consequences to them, then they know that they sort of have us at the horns of a strategic dilemma, and it gives them the ability to be adventurous. It gives them ability to reduce our ability to deter them, because the more options we have, the more difficult it is for them to go through their risk calculation. So what we are trying to do really is continue to provide freedom of maneuver for the joint force, for the joint and coalition force. And so we are espousing this as not only the Army, I mean, this is our concept, but as we work with our joint and coalition partners that are well represented here, what we are trying to do, and I'm kind of boiling it down so that folks that have spent the majority of their time in the Armor Corps, like myself, can sort of get our head around it. We are trying to preserve our freedom of maneuver. And when you take a look around the world, the things that our enemies and potential enemies are doing, such as, building new land in the middle of the ocean, spending a lot of time and effort on anti-access area denial systems, long-range fires, et cetera, like that. What they are trying to do is fix us and prevent us from maneuvering. They are trying to control various key elements of various domains and deny that area of maneuver to us. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we step back, and while we may be, as I said yesterday, we may be sometimes outranged, outgunned, outnumbered, what we are trying to figure out, okay, I might not always be able to outgun everybody. I may not be able to outrange everybody. I might not outnumber everybody. But like I said yesterday, what we do want to do is outdecide people. And the reason we want to outdecide them is we want to outdecide them so that we can outmaneuver them, because that has always been our strength. If we can provide a level of freedom of maneuver, what that does to the enemy, it makes it very difficult for them to focus all of their activity in one area. It makes it very difficult for them to go through a risk calculation, because in the end, what we are trying to do, of course, is deter aggression. And the way you deter aggression is you take away your enemy's options, so it's not necessarily a battle of artillery, it's a battle of options. Who has more things left on their plate that they can still present to the enemy, as compared to the enemy's ability to mitigate that? And when you start looking at that, what we have found is we have to get away from domain versus domain. So my threat folks will come out to me and they'll list an enemy's or potential enemies' artillery pieces. Here's our artillery piece, here's a U.S. artillery, their range, our range, their range, our range. U.S. tanks, enemy's tanks, range, and we kind of take a look at weapon system to weapon system, domain to domain. Here's a land problem. Here's what this land can do. And in some ways, just through math of force structure or the science and the physics of that weapon system, it actually can become very difficult, very expensive, and you can't get a lot of return on your investment when you just go weapon system by weapon system or domain by domain. Where we find, as we've done some analysis, where you can get a big return on investment is that if you can get what we're calling these windows of domain superiority, if I can bring together a space capability, a cyber capability, a maritime capability, a land capability, if I can bring that together at the appropriate point in time, and then what I'm doing is I'm not only maneuvering forces around the battlefield, I'm maneuvering these windows of domain superiority around the battlefield. That becomes very, very difficult then to mitigate, because now I have multiple options. to provide a capability to maneuver. And as one of those subordinate options get taken away, I sort of have other things that I can rely on, and that I can move from one to the other. So yesterday I stole Bob Brown's slide. Today I'm going to steal one of Eric Wesley's slide, if you put the next slide up. So Eric showed this yesterday as part of our cross-domain maneuver slide. The one thing I want to focus on here, and this is kind of a multi-tiered layering of the domains, but what we want to be able to do is, as we have a problem, say we have a problem in the air domain, say, you know what, maybe the best thing to deal with this problem isn't necessarily just from another air asset. Maybe I'll use a cyber in a space, maybe land, maritime, etc. And so when I was growing up, I'm in a maneuver part of the Army. This is put out by the Maneuver Center of Excellence. And we would always consider maneuver from a land point of view, infantry, armor, et cetera, and supported by other enablers. But we were always focused on maneuvering on land. And so then our enemy would focus on presenting challenges to maneuvering on land. They would put minefields out there. They would dig a tank ditch, and they would drop trees and create an abattis or something, so that we were maneuvering in one domain, and then they would develop challenges in that domain. One of the things that we want to focus on now is just not taking a domain and maneuvering in it, but we want to maneuver through domains. We want to maneuver from one domain to another, and we want to do it in a way that is sort of keeping us ahead of the decision cycle of the enemy. And so what I have found in combat and even our training exercises is that when you are doing something, and even if it is working, you're doing something to the enemy and it's working, there's a temporal nature to it, and it's just a matter of time till they figure out a way to mitigate against that. They figure out how to overcome that, whatever it is. And so what we have to be able to do is to say, you know what, I have many different ways to maneuver. I can maneuver within a domain, I can maneuver between domains, and when I start coming up with a combination of things that are working, I also have to have in the back of my mind, this is only going to work for a little while. Even if it's working greater than any expectation we have, you have to realize it's just a matter of time till they figure out, they jam this, or they do this here, or they do that. And so we have to start training our leaders that when you're doing something and it's working, that is when you need to start thinking about how you might want to present a different dilemma to the enemy. Do you have something keyed up already? Are you ready to show them something different, either from a different domain or a different capability of the domain that you're in, so that this is part of the out-deciding them. It's not out-reacting to them, it's out-deciding them. So that you then can make a decision to do something else, because if you can out-decide them, you literally have intellectually outmaneuvered them. Too often, and especially when we just focus on domain via domain, we sort of are, at best, sort of trying to outreact them. We have a scheme of maneuver, we're going down this way, and we run into an obstacle belt. Well, then we have to breach the obstacle belt. Well, by nature, you're reacting to that obstacle that was put there. Whereas if you think, I have this objective, and I have various options available to me, and as one option starts to lose momentum, these other ones are already going to be teed up, and we're going to start to take advantage of them. Now, I guess that briefs well on PowerPoint, et cetera, like that. But then when you start trying to peel the onion back, you have to say, what does that really mean? What does that mean to the joint force? What does that mean to coalition members, et cetera, like that? And then I also, we're professional organizations, so we're always asking for feedback, and people grade our homework again. Well, Dave, we sort of do this already. We do this, and I've done this for a while, and we call in the Air Force, and Navy shows up, we do stuff, et cetera, like that. But we really don't, not like we're talking about it. And one of the big differences is between even what we're doing now and what we did with air-land battle is that we had a problem, whatever it is. And then we would dissect that problem into parts. We'd either dissect the problem into domains, we would dissect that problem into warfighting functions like maneuver, sustainment, fires, intel, et cetera. And then we would go off and start to solve those bits of the problems. The reason we did that so that you could get your hands around it, eat the elephant a chunk at a time. And you would come up with solutions, but the people solving those problems would see it within their world. Well, this is an air problem. This is an intel problem. This is a sustainment problem. And then they would come up with a solution which optimized it in their part of the world, but sort of sub-optimized it holistically. Then we would bring back what I would call a set of federated solutions. We would bring back, well, here's how the intel guys are going to go about it. Here's how the maneuver guys will go about it. Here's how the maritime guys will go about it. Here's how the ground guys will go about it. So we now have solutions that are optimized for their domain or their functional area, but it's sort of sub-optimized across the broad spectrum accomplishing the mission. So now we have this array of federated subordinate solutions, and then what we tried to do is synchronize and sort of bring together a set of federated solutions that maybe were not necessarily built to operate with each other or in conjunction with each other. And we've gone to great lengths to do that. We try to have training, bring in all elements of the joint force, the coalition force, but they are bringing in their subordinately federated solution to a problem. Or maybe it's a mission command system. Here's this black box, here's this black box. Well, I got this little black box. If you put the little black box between the two big ones, they'll talk, et cetera. So again, you're synchronizing federated solutions. And the reason we got to that is because of the way we define the problems. Because we would give a problem to somebody and say, you're the intel guy, this is an intel problem. You're the maneuver guy, this is a maneuver problem. You're the air guy, this is an air problem. So we're trying to go further left and say, you know, in the end, instead of having to synchronize a set of federated solutions, and we've all grown up overusing that term, synchronize this, synchronize that, synchronize that. Well, why do we have to spend all this time synchronizing stuff? Because I guess it's not synchronized. If it was self-synchronized, why do we have to have synchronization cells, synchronization meetings? Exactly, you know, the OIC of the synchronization group that comes by. Because obviously without it, the world is unsynchronized. So if you go to the left and say, you know what, instead of synchronizing federated solutions, what we want is early on a converged and integrated solution. And that the problem from the very beginning is defined not by the subordinate federated components of it, but you define it as a holistic problem from the very beginning that you understand is this problem has multiple domains to it from the very beginning. So I want the solution to be, from the beginning, a converged solution. This bring together all of these things. I don't want you all running off into separate windowless cubicles coming up with a solution that we got to come back and then have the synchronization cell sit down and grease tape and lacing wire together. So the difference begins even at problem definition. We have to define problems differently, and then we have to start solving them differently from the very beginning. Because if we do that, then what happens is the ability to maneuver between the domains and the ability to maneuver through the domains is inherent in the solution that we came up with. It's already there. And it's not sort of an afterthought. Because if you start thinking about it that way and solving it that way, then already in the back of your mind, you're saying, you know what? When this problem comes up, I already have built into the solution multiple options. There are already multiple ways to get through that, and I can, much more easily move through those solutions. And since I can move through those solutions pretty easily, and I've defined the problem that way, I now can probably out-decide my enemy if my enemy has not thought that way. If the enemy has presented me dilemmas that, from their construct, are single domain in nature, and they're looking to take me out domain by domain, I now have multiple options, which allows me now to present sort of what we really want to do is present multiple dilemmas to the enemy. Because if I can present multiple dilemmas to the enemy that they think they either don't have a way to solve, or they can't solve them as quickly as we can present another set of dilemmas to them, the desire is that they decide that trying to be adventurous or conduct activity we don't want them to do is it is too big a risk. That they just can't see how they're going to get away with it, so to speak. That there are just too many things that will be thrown in their path, and that it's not any one capability that they may have a leap on. It's just the fact that our ability to maneuver and always get to a position of advantage that's to our advantage is going to be something that they aren't going to be able to react to. Because in order to do that, it takes a lot of investment in leader development, training, thinking about things differently from the very beginning. Actually, venues like this become very important. And if you look at our enemies and potential enemies that we will be facing in the future, the kinds of discussions that we're having here and the kinds of groups that are pulled together and sort of the tough questions we ask each other and how we train and develop our people, that's not generally the way they go about doing things. They tend to be focusing, I want to have a great capability in a domain. I want to outrange somebody. I want to outnumber somebody. I want to do that. So that plays to their way of war and their way of viewing things. And so what we've decided is we don't want to play their game. We want to sort of play our game. We want to put the bets on the things that we think lend themselves to our advantage culturally, the way our nations are run, the way we build our military. The things are, I think, inherently advantageous to us. And kind of getting back to that thing, we think that our ability to maneuver, which is to take all the elements of combat power and move them constantly to a position of advantage and empower all folks to do that, that's a very difficult thing to be able to pick apart individually, because you kind of have to take the whole thing down. You can't just pick it apart. And I'll just go to one last slide till we go to the questions here. This is an example of cross-domain fires. Admiral Harris was talking about it, gave the Army the to-do list. He wants the Army to sink a ship, shoot down a missile, then shoot down the airplane that shot the missile, et cetera. Actually a pretty good visualization. So here we have a list of things to kind of break us out of, and I'll say from an Army point of view, that Army artillery just doesn't shoot from ground to ground, that you could have land to maritime, land to land, land to air, et cetera, like that, and that you could kind of do it depending upon what the threat is, and that you can move through that process pretty easily, and that it was already part of the solution. But then that requires actually a lot of change on how you do things. We don't build Army fires units that have all those capacities. We don't have staffs that can synchronize and deconflict all of those domains out there. We are working on a multi-domain task force, working closely with Bob Brown and PACOM and the folks there to start to build icons in the U.S. Army. We're building one that has capability in it that we don't have in any icon in the Army right now. All of the domains, space, multiple fires aspects of it, information, cyber, et cetera. Build that so organically within that icon, you can access those domains and you can start to put together the pieces from a very early stage of planning and definition of the problem, how you would maneuver through those domains. And so that when the planners get together and start describing the problem, they are describing the problem from the very beginning as a multi-domain problem. I mean, in the Army, we wouldn't say, well, you know, this operation is just going to be infantry. That's it. No artillery, you know, no Army aviation, no armored force or anything, just that. And then this one over here, this is just going to be the artillery guys. And this one, no, we look at it from the very beginning. Well, of course it's combined arms. And then when we have a staff, who's there? all the elements of combined arms. And then, okay, artillery folks, what do you have to do? And sustainers, of course we have to sustain it. We don't even think twice about that. We know from the very beginning, this problem has lots of parts to it. You got to have something that's sustainable. Got to have intel-driven ops. I got to have this, I got to have that. But we've got to now expand it and say, of course this problem has multiple domains to it. Of course that's got to be part of the solution. We just can't come up with our solution and then get together and say, how do we patch on all these bits and pieces of it? So that's kind of a little bit more of why we're doing what we're doing and what sort of some of the larger goals are and how we're using it, not only as a tactical and operational construct, but we think a way to give the U.S. and our coalition partners really a strategic hedge to us against the enemy well before they even do anything. Because what we're trying to do is influence their risk calculation process. If we can influence their risk calculation process such that they determine the risk is too high for the payoff, then actually we've done what all people that wear uniform want to do, and that is prevent conflict and actually deter it on our terms. So with that, I'll answer any questions here. Kind of go through and paraphrase them as we have them. Multi-domain is about integrating services capabilities. Do you think in the very long term, merging of two or more services to achieve real integration? I get this question a lot. I don't think so, and I don't even know if it's desirable. And so it's interesting how this comes up in military circles a lot. Well, we just need to, like in the Army, get rid of branches. Just a soldier, so everyone do that. And then while you're at it, get rid of services. We're just all purple. If you go back to the last slide, or go to any slide, the second slide, a slide, other than that one. That doesn't look easy, and it's actually meant to not look easy. You're going to have all kinds of expertise. But it's interesting in the military why we think that, well, at some point, let's just make everybody do everything. We don't do that in other fields. We don't say, you know what, I'm going in for brain surgery. But any doctor will work. I mean, a podiatrist, he's the only one available, send him in. I mean, the foot's connected to the legs, connected to the head, so I don't need a brain surgeon. I'll let the podiatrist operate on my brain. And I love podiatrists. I'm not saying, but we're like, well, that'd be stupid. Why would a podiatrist operate on your brain? It's a different part of the body. Yeah, but it's all hooked together. It's the same body. Like, we don't even ask questions like that. I'm not saying it's a bad question, but I get that all the time. It's somehow like, well, this military stuff just can't be that hard. Why can't you just do everything? I mean, this isn't like an episode of JAG where, they're Navy pilots, they're SEALs, they're lawyers, all that. I mean, that's only on TV. Really. I mean, it takes sometimes a lifetime for all of us. Sometimes we never get there. We need levels of expertise that it's a 24/7 thing, just being able to do that. So I just never subscribe, and I'm not like a parochial kind of guy. I think it's unreasonable that somehow you have sort of these Renaissance people that they're literally everything. I think we need people that are really good at doing certain things, and we've got to train our commanders to integrate it, et cetera, like that. But I just don't see the day. Wow, I don't know what problem that solves, quite honestly. So this is not meant to say we're going to do it with branches or services or anything like that. In fact, we're almost going the other way. So in the Army, we just created a new branch this year, cyber. It's a new branch. Okay. Now, we don't do that often in the Army. The last branch we created in the Army was Special Operations Forces, and that was in 1985. So we only do this like once every 30 years. So I'm thinking I'm good for 30 years now. We don't have a branch. The reason we created cyber as a branch, this is very interesting, and I think it gets back to that question. It wasn't because we weren't training people well in cyber, because we would train people in cyber and they would go do stuff at the NSA or whatever like that. The problem is we weren't using their talent well. We couldn't manage their talent because they would go do something great in cyber and then say, well, your real branch is intel or infantry, so you've got to go be branch qualified, so you've got to go down to Fort Hood and inspect arms rooms for 3 years or something. And then what happened is we invested, so we trained them well, we just didn't use them well. Because some of these things require so much training and specialized capability, and it changes so quickly. If you come, I'm not a cyber expert, I see Patricia's here, so she can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. If you say, well, the last time I did cyber was 2 years ago, that might as well have been like 200 years ago. You've got to do it all the time. You've got to maintain proficiency. So I think in some ways we may even have to develop higher levels of expertise in certain areas. So long answer to a short question, but I don't think doing away with expertise is probably the way to go. What effects do you foresee from the implementation of multi-domain at the company, battalion, brigade level? Actually, this is a great question. So what I'm seeing more and more of is at lower and lower levels, you're going to have to understand capabilities in multiple domains, unlike probably what Bob and I ever had to do. That doesn't mean you're an expert on them, but you do need to understand them. I will use cyber as an example. So we stood up the Army Cyber Center of Excellence when it was a branch down in Fort Gordon. We have these great cyber warriors down there. But I always tell the folks at Fort Gordon, look, you're the proponent for cyber, and that means you got to set up Fort Gordon and everything. But what that also means is you've got to teach the rest of the Army about this. So when I was at Fort Benning at the Infantry Officer Advanced Course, actually they taught us about intelligence preparation in the battlefield. They taught us about sustainment. They taught us about fires. And so what is being required now is that I wasn't an expert on those things, but they had to say, this is what you need to know as a maneuver guy. You better figure out how you're going to get fuel. You better figure out how you're going to bring in intel. Now, you got experts that you can rely on, but you have to know how to sort of bring this together and what it works on. And so that's the same thing now with these domains. So down at the, captain's career course now, we talk about cyber. These things you're not an expert, but these are other domains that we're bringing in. You are going to have access to it more than you think, and it literally is another rock in their rucksack. So I think it becomes a greater challenge for our younger leaders. But the good news is I spent a lot of time with them, lieutenants, captains, folks coming out of basic training, whatever. And the good news is when you talk to them about that, say, you know what, we're going to have to give you a lot of tools to get to a position of relative advantage. You're going to have to know about cyber, you're going to have to know about this, you're going to have to be connected, et cetera, like that. And they kind of look at me like I'm stating the obvious. Oh, you mean we're going to have to understand what's going on in the world and pull it all together? Yeah, well, of course. Because that's the world they grew up in. Because they're all, as soon as they got an answer, they look down, they're connected to everyone. They are very used to saying, you know what, I got a problem, but there's probably many different places I can go to get answers, many different tools that I can bring to bear. In fact, if I told them, look, here's the deal, Lieutenant, Sergeant, you're an infantryman. All of your problems are just infantry problems. And I don't want you thinking about cyber. I don't want you thinking about intel sustainment. I need you just to focus on, sharpening your bayonet. I mean, they'd probably look at me like, this guy's nuts. He's not leveraging all this capability. I got it right here in my personal device. So the good news is they're ready for it. I think the challenge is for us as an institution is how do we develop that and bring it together. And I think that, what a segue. How do you envision the Army educating the force on multi-domain battle? This becomes sort of what we do and how we go about solving problems is we come up with a .mil-PF solution to something. So we identify a problem, and then we have a .mil-PF solution, doctrine, organization, training, leader development, material, personnel, et cetera, like that. There is a lot of focus, a lot of times, on the material part of it, and that's important. But as General Ham said, the thing that we really pride ourselves on is our men and women and their ability to really figure tough things out and come up with solutions. And so what I think we have to do is we educate them about this, but then we have to change the way that we train them. and Bob used to talk about this when he was at CAC before, and we're working on it now with others, is that when we develop training, this makes it a bigger challenge for exercise directors and people that run training exercises. In fact, I spent the morning with the 25th Infantry Division and Chris Cavoli and his guys that just did a warfire exercise. And we were talking about this, and they're the ones that brought it up. So we gotta, in other words, we're gonna have to present them with lots of different things that they're gonna have to deal with, none of which have an approved solution, all of which have multiple options for a way to be successful. And that requires a lot of thought in putting together a training exercise like that to say, look, do I have all of the domains in there? Do I have all of the variables that they're gonna deal with? And have I made the training exercise agile enough that as they start showing initiative, as they start becoming agile, that the training exercise can respond to that, and that we sort of reward initiative and pulling together all different kinds of options that they're actually now, as they're maneuvering through these domains, as they're trying to get to a position of advantage. I think the training part of it is actually almost more difficult than the educating part of it. Because the educating part of it, we can talk about it, show slides and etc. like that. How you build a training exercise and continually sort of ramp that up, that's a challenge for leadership. And so we're working on synthetic training environment, our STE and things like that, because the level of complexity we want to get to, the level of risk we want to take, the magnitude of things we want to put them in, whether it's, dense urban areas, et cetera, some of them are just very hard to do, boots in the dirt, even at the central core of the NTC. So we're going to have to combine our, in a synthetic environment, live, virtual, constructive, so it's somewhat seamless, and so that to these young soldiers, we're giving them multiple dilemmas, and they're being able to access all the tools they have and solve them. And so we are really building a new training environment to operate in. In fact, I was talking to one of my great predecessors, General Wallace, here yesterday. And so when I was growing up in the Army, a lot of us, the big training revolution were the combat training centers. So we stood up the combat training centers. You had a world-class opposing force. You had observer controllers. You had instrumentation. We instituted the institutional phenomena, really, of AAR, which I think really put us to a whole nother level of professionalism. And so it was all about going out to the NTC or JMTC or JRTC, and that's where you really were put through your, put through the paces and all that. I think the next revolution in training for us in the Army is now home station training, because life is getting so complicated, and we ask so much of folks that we say, I can't wait to just give you that really immersive training environment like once every 2 years, a battalion, brigade commander scenario. I've got to be able to do that at home station training, and I've got to do it at a reasonable overhead. It can't cost me millions of dollars to do this. I've got to be able to replicate this environment that we're talking about at the squad, platoon, company level, et cetera, and I've got to do it repeatedly at your home station. And so I think the next big training revolution, when we grew up, it was combat training centers. I think the next one is going to be home station training, or even in their off time. If you put a lot of this stuff in virtual mode or constructive mode, that's what a lot of our soldiers are doing already in some version of it on their off time. There are things that we're looking at that they will be exciting enough to them that they may even do it, when they're not, on duty. So I think my time is, we got more? All right, keep it coming. You're the timekeeper. How much time do we have? The shot clock still says 0, so either I have unlimited time or I'm out of time. Yeah, just reset it, right? Yeah. Yeah, comment on what type of network is required to enable multi-domain. A big one. So this is one of the things that comes up all the time, and we're spending a lot of effort on it. And so I prefer not to say the network, in that it is an end in of itself. The network is an enabler of mission command, so that you can execute mission command to conduct multi-domain battle. So what we have to do and work on is, how do you always deliver to the commander understanding and visualization of the battlefield, so that he or she then can direct, lead, and assess. The network is part of it. Part of it is training, so they know how to visualize, can articulate commander's intent. And then it's determining what level of connectivity has to occur when and where and how often. I think as we've headed down this road previously, we kind of did a little bit too much of a broad brush and got focused on connectivity constantly versus I need to constantly ensure I'm commanding. Those are two different things. And so it will have to be a robust network. It'll have to be resilient. It'll have to be all of those things that we're looking at. But then also, you've got to have the right doctrine, organization, training, leader development. It's just not the electrons in and of themselves. But clearly, it's going to have to be something that is minimum overhead, very resilient, and is something that has a level of reliability such that you can, with an understandable degree of risk, plan an operation assuming that network is going to provide that level of connectivity there. And I guess the last one here. Maneuvering given adversary multiple problems are a huge benefit to combat forces, but creates vulnerabilities to logistic forces, supply chains, addressing concern challenge. So this somewhat related to the last question. So as we look at this, and as you look at this slide, you get sort of two big long poles in the tent. One is how is it all networked together? Because what we say in the future, we're going to have dispersed forces, but they must be mutually supportive. We don't want 15 simultaneous Mogadishus going on. So they will be dispersed, but mutually supportive. The challenge with that not only becomes how do you connect it via mission command systems, but how do you sustain that? And so I think we have to think very differently about sustainment. And that is, just as you may not have constant connectivity, you got to develop a concept of support, which right now, Darrell Williams at CASCOM is looking at, that you've got to come up with a concept of support that assumes you won't have constant secure lines of communication. So how do you do that? Sort of almost like burst sustainment. Well, everyone loves to put this problem on the sustainers like it's their problem, but as they always tactfully remind me, it's you maneuver guys who are the problem, because we say, oh, you sustainers, you need so many, all these tractor-trailer trucks full of fuel. Well, all they're doing is meeting my demand, okay, as a heavy force commander. So I'm really the problem, not them. I just put the problem in their rucksack. So we've got to take a look at what are the big challenges out there and how do you go about them differently. So fuel is one of the big ones out there as we maneuver forces over large distances. So one of the examples I use is they say, well, okay, we got to have, HEMTT moving or 10K tankers or various things like that. Well, that may not be possible in the future. You may not have constant security on lines of communication, but that's not really the problem. Because the problem we have is with regards, and I'll use fuel as an example, it is how do you move energy around the battlefield, okay? So you may have a huge fuel supply, at a port or something like that, and you got mechanized forces out here. So it's not that you don't have fuel, it's just that it's not where you want it. So the fuel is here, it needs to be here. So it's really, and fuel is just a type of energy. So how do I move energy around the battlefield? Well, petroleum products are a source of energy, but there are other sources of energy out there and other ways of packaging it. So people do come to me, well, let's work on more miles per gallon. And I'm not, anti-environment, anti-efficiency, but we can do this. And those of you that work this problem and thermodynamic aficionados, hey, we're gonna increase, fuel efficiency by 10%, which is actually a lot, and it's hard to do. Okay, so now it gets 5 more gallons per fuel. Okay, rather than 80 10K tankers, I need 60. That really hasn't solved my problem, okay? Getting more miles per gallon within the laws of thermodynamics doesn't really get me there. I mean, to dramatically change it. So if you say, well, what if you had, I'm not saying this is our proof solution example, what if energy was delivered differently on the battlefield? What if you had fuel cells and they were chunks of energy and you literally are just plugging them into a vehicle. And then when you want to deliver more energy, you have an aero supplied maybe autonomously with autonomously flown drones or something. They could drop down pallets of chunks of fuel cells that you could then plug in. Now you're not having to worry about the lines of communication. I'm not saying that's our approved plan. I'm just giving an example that we have to think very differently about this sustainment piece and really identify the problem. And from my point of view, one of the problems, especially coming from sort of a heavy mechanized point of view, is how do I move energy around the battlefield? Okay, it's not getting it to the battlefield. It's literally how do I move it around the battlefield, which means I might want to package it differently. I might want to use it differently. I might want to have a different type of energy that I consume in my vehicles. Because, I mean, the concepts are meant to drive. Look, we're looking at 2025, 2050. We're looking long term, trying to figure out where we want to invest in. But I think our current way of sustaining, no pun intended, is unsustainable. And you're only going to get so far with the way that we do it. And we've got to have sort of some dramatic changes. And the shot clock has 10 seconds left. No more questions. All right. General Ham, again, thanks for providing this great venue. Thanks you all for coming. And I'll hang out afterwards if you have any more great ideas or questions. Thanks, folks.